Hi, it's Rob from the Brush and Boltgun. Today I'm going to be doing a tutorial on how to paint a Nighthaunt Lord Executioner. The first colour today is going to be Citadel Baneblade Brown. I'm going to use this to paint the wooden of the Gallows. Now usually I'd use Vallejo Beige Brown, but for the Citadel ones I'm going to try and keep to using the Citadel colours. So I thought I'd try the Baneblade Brown as an equivalent to the Beige Brown that I'd usually use. Now it is a little bit too light, but you can still get it looking like a good piece of wood. So that's what we're going to do on this one. Once you've finished painting that, we can move on to the next colour, which is going to be Vallejo Black. So whichever black you use usually. All we're going to do here is paint his robes on the front, like the top part of them. You obviously want the bottom part leaving white so that you can do the shades and the different colours on there to get it looking all ghostly. While this top part you want to give a decent colour of black just to get that all smooth. Now what you might find when you're painting this is that the higher up the model it is, the more the model tends to wobble about because it's on quite a thin bit of sort of like ghostly bit. So what I found was that painting it, I started painting all the bits at the top first and working down so that you could like hold onto the body of the Lord Executioner and then hold further down as you're working down the model. So next up is going to be some Citadel Zandri dust, and we're using this to paint the noose. Just give that a decent coat of Zandri dust, then we can move on to the next one. With the noose done, we can move on to the next colour. That's going to be Citadel Mournfang Brown. We're going to be using this to do the straps which are holding the Gallows onto his back. It's quite interesting that the straps seem to go inside his body to hold them onto there. It's quite a cool little feature. There are a lot of cool details on these Nighthaunt models, just little things like this, which I think really set them apart from a lot of the other ones. Kind of reminds me a bit of the Lord of Blight. He's got a similar strapping holding things onto his back. So next up we're going to be using Citadel Leadbelcher. We're using this to do the head of the axe. Once we've got the nice smooth layer onto that, we can move on to the next colour. Now we're going to use some Citadel Dryad bark, and this is going to be to do the handle of the axe. Just want to take care so you don't get any on the axe head or the hands of the Lord Executioner. You want to keep them white. If you do just go over them with a bit of white, you can carry on from there. So the handle done, we're going to use a little bit of Citadel Agrax bronze, and that is going to be to do the little manacle on his wrist here. Doesn't seem to paint very well over white, this colour, so you might have to give it a couple of layers. Once you've got a nice smooth layer of that on there, you can move on to the next. So now I'm going to start working on the base. I'm going to use a little bit of Citadel Nurgling green to do these little vines at the bottom here. Little bits of plant life. So like the other Nighthaunt I've done, we're going to be doing purple roses. The vines in the Nurgling green. I'll tie them all together a little bit. I'm going to use a little bit of Citadel Rakarth flesh, and that is going to be to paint the skull on the bottom as well. Once they've got that nice smooth layer on there, it's on to the next colour. Now we're going to use a little bit of Citadel Xereus purple, and this is going to be to do the roses. So to be aware when you're doing these bits, you can see the roses from the back as well as little parts of that. Like so. I'm going to start with the shades. I'm going to start with Citadel Agrax Earthshade. So I'm going to give a nice coat of this to the straps holding the Gallows there. Also a good coating on the Gallows as well. Give this a reasonable coating, it will darken down the Baneblade brown a little. But you don't want to do it too much that it pools and leaves little shiny recesses. Next up we're going to be using Citadel Nuln Oil. I'm going to use this to do the blade of the axe. We're also going to use it to do the handle of the axe as well, where the Dryad bark is. So you can just do that whole length with the Nuln Oil. Taking care not to get it on the hands once again. Like so. Now we're going for Citadel Seraphim Sepia, and this is going to be to go onto the skull at the bottom there, so a very little quick layer this. Like so. Next up, it's Citadel Athonian Camo Shade, and this is just going to be used to do the Nurgling green roots at the bottom there. Use this one because it's quite a dull and drab green, it doesn't make them too bright, which I think helps make the white ethereal glow of the Nighthaunt stand out a bit more. So now there's a little bit of Druchii Violet going onto each of the roses. Like so. Now we're going to be working on the ethereal parts for the spirit at the top there. We're going to be using Citadel Contrast, Apothecary White, and also the technical paint Nihilakh Oxide. So you start off using the Apothecary White and putting that all over the spirits here. And where you've got it pooled, you're then going to add little spots of the Nihilakh Oxide. Now the process for doing this with just these two colours took about 11 minutes or so. So this is only a short section, and then I'm going to put the full video up of painting the whole of these spirits start to finish. That's going up on Sunday. Now we're going to be using the Apothecary White on the robes at the bottom as well. So same thing again, you're going to be adding this onto the trailing ethereal part, and then you're going to be using next some of the Nighthaunt Gloom technical paint. You're going to be working that up from the bottom and then kind of doing a merge towards the top where the two join together. So you'll see how that works out during the next section of the video. You want to get sort of maybe the top half of the ethereal part painted up with the Apothecary White. So here comes the Nighthaunt Gloom. We're going to put this on the bottom there of each of these parts, and you're just going to gently spread that into the top so that it mixes with the Apothecary White. You can blend that together in those recesses, leaving the lighter shades where you can see the white showing through on the raised parts. So say there's going to be a full video of this coming up as well. That'll probably be the Sunday after this one coming. Now we're going to use a little bit of Ulthuan Grey, and we're going to work this into all of the raised areas and the lighter areas on these spirits here. So you can pick out the details as you would do for a skull when you're reapplying one of the highlights. You don't want to go too over the top with this because you want plenty of the shade in the recesses and blending into the Ulthuan White. So next with this we're going to use a little bit of Vallejo White, or whichever white you're using. We're just going to highlight the areas that we just put the Ulthuan Grey on there to give them little bright sections to make them really stand out. This will mean that with the shade and the shade going over the white, then the Ulthuan Grey, and finally the white on the top, you'll have quite a nice effect on these little spirit fellas flying around the back. Now we're going to start working with the Ulthuan Grey on the lower robes there. This is pretty much what you've just been doing on the spirits at the top, but I've separated them down into two separate parts, just so you can see examples of both and how they work. So this is going on exactly like the spirits at the top, and it'd be similar to if you were painting robes, doing like the first highlight onto the robes. So if you think about it like that, and that's how you're working the grey into the rest of this ethereal part. So it looks kind of like that at the moment. Next we're going to be using a bit of Vallejo White, or whichever white that you're using, and we're going to be applying this the same way as the spirits. You're just going to be highlighting those parts that you put the Ulthuan Grey on, just to bring the lights back into them. So you're picking out the tops of the crests of the robe, really just doing thin highlights just to give that a really crisp white extreme highlight to them. Now we're going to be using a little bit of Citadel Nuln Oxide. We're going to start using this initially on this lower part and highlighting the Nighthaunt gloom, using the Nuln Oxide as a kind of first highlight on this part of the ethereal bits. So this is how the robes are looking at the moment. What we're going to do now is use a little bit of Nuln Oxide. I'm going to mix a tiny little bit of white in there, so you've got quite a thin mix of paint, and then you're just going to use that to highlight the parts that you put the Nuln Oxide on now. That'll give them a little bit of brightness and make some of the ridges and details on the ethereal pieces stand out. Like so. Now we're going to go back to Baneblade Brown. I'm going to start working on the Gallows. So when you're doing this, you don't need it to be 100% smooth, as the wood is looking quite old, quite grainy. So you're only applying the paint along the grain of the wood. So because the grain of the wood here is going up and down, you're only going to be painting the brush up and down. You don't want any side to side motions with that. You're just going to work that paint on, leaving the details and the ridges and making it look like it really does have that upward downward grain, even on the areas that are smoother and don't have too much detail on. So we've added a little bit of Citadel Zandri dust to the Baneblade Brown. We're just going to start doing highlights. Again, you're only going to be doing them up and down on this part, just following the grain of the wood on each section of the gallows. I'll link up a video I did about how to paint wood. It's using slightly different colours, but it's mainly about adding shades and doing the grain with the shades. I'll put that up as a card here. So next we're just going to use some pure Zandri dust, and we're going to use this on the noose. This is just to bring the original colour back out. Give the rope that kind of old rope colour. When that's finished, it's on to the next colour. So now we're going to use a little bit of Citadel Rakarth flesh mixed in with the Zandri dust, and we're just going to highlight the noose. So because this is on an angle, it's kind of almost 45 degrees to the ground, you want to make sure that you're highlighting the top as such, so the light will be coming down at that 45 degrees to it, so that you've got the highlights on the sort of top right edges of it and the top left edges of it, depending on which way you're looking at the noose. Now we're going to be using a little bit of Citadel Agrax Earthshade. We're going to start working on the wood of the gallows and working that into the top and the bottom of each section of wood, as though there's damp in there and the wood's a little bit rotten. So again, you're only adding this in vertical strokes. You don't want to be doing this too much side to side or just washing it on. You just want to kind of get that vertical stroke there, because then when you've got the darker sections and the darker streaks in it, they're all following the grain of the wood. So next, it's Citadel Ulthuan Camo Shade. We're going to do similar to what we've just done with the Agrax Earthshade, but you're just going to roughly apply it to the end of each piece of the wood. That's just so there's a little bit of damp got into the wood, and it's a little bit more rotting than it probably would have been when it was made. Pretty sure the Nighthaunt don't care for their gallows quite as well as they should do. Next up, it's Mournfang Brown. I'm going to start working on those straps again. So you want to leave the shade in the recesses and just apply the Mournfang Brown to the flat of the straps and the top bits, making sure you leave the shade in the recesses to bring out those details. Completely out of camera shot there. Now we're going to add a little bit of Rakarth flesh to the Mournfang Brown. We're just going to start highlighting these, so you want to make sure that you get these top edges, or in the case of ones where they're slightly overlapped, maybe the bottom edge, maybe some of the areas of flat strap that goes around there. Now we're going to add a little bit more Rakarth flesh to it. I'm going to do one final highlight. This is just going to be extreme highlight, so you just want to put this onto the edges, give them a slightly rough and jagged highlight, as though the leather straps have been a bit worn and scraped, because again I don't think they're going to be in the best of conditions. Like so. Okay, so now actually using a little bit of Vallejo German Grey. Actually haven't shown the paint here, but it is Vallejo German Grey that we're doing the highlight on the robe part at the top. again, you want to think about where the light's coming from and what parts of the robe are going to be highlighted. You can also bend this a little bit just so you can get some of those details to show through with this layer. But mainly getting this dark grey applied to it so you get that highlight on the black. Just get it to start looking a little bit more 3D. I'm going to use some Citadel Mechanicus standard grey just to highlight the German grey, so you want to be going for the edges of all the creases here, the edges of any lumps and bumps on there, just to make them stand out. The main thing that you don't want to do here is over highlight, just because you do want it to look really dark and murky. If you put too many lighter highlights on it, it will make it stand out too much and look a bit too bright. So now I'm going to work on the axe. We're going to use some Citadel Agrax Earthshade and just spread that around on there to get it so it's looking a little bit dark and a bit tainted on there. Like so. I'm just going to start reapplying the Citadel Nurgling green onto the shoots that are coming up off the ground here, the weeds, whatever they are. So I'm just highlighting the top edges of them. Any areas that will be catching the light if it was coming down from above. Now I'm going to add a little bit of Vallejo White to the Nurgling green and do one little final highlight on these little shoots. Like so. Now it's onto a little bit of Genestealer purple. We're going to use this to highlight the roses. Now I haven't reapplied the Xereus purple in this case because the detail in the raised areas are really small. So I figured you could just use the Genestealer purple because it's not going to make that much difference to trying to paint on the Xereus purple and then highlighting it afterwards. Just going to do one final highlight on this using a little bit of Citadel Pink Horror. So you're just going to pick out a few of the little details on the top edges and highlight them. Like so. Now we're working on the skull, so we're going to use some Citadel Rakarth Flesh just to reapply the base colour. You can leave the Seraphim Sepia in the recesses. We'll be picking out the details like the ridges over the eyes, the cheekbones, the teeth, the bridge of the nose, that kind of thing. And painting the top of the skull and around the sides, but leaving the underside still shaded. Now we're going on to Citadel Ushabti Bone. You're going to do the first highlight with this, picking out similar details but leaving some of that Rakarth flesh on display there. Obviously the shade in the recesses too. So you don't want to cover all of the Rakarth flesh with this, you just want to do maybe about 2/3 of it, just to get that nice bone colour in the majority of areas. So we've added a little bit of white to the Ushabti bone, and we're now going to highlight this. So here you're just doing little tiny extreme highlights, picking out details, little areas, maybe doing a little bit on the top there as well, maybe catching a light. But mainly this is just to do the edges and parts of the face on the skull, just to pick out those details and make them stand out. Now we're going to use some Seraphim Sepia. I'm going to use this around all the pockmarks that are on the blade of the axe. We're just doing this so that we can add a little tiny bit of a like yellowy brown colour, where we're going to be adding a little bit of a rust effect. You do want to leave areas where you've got that Nuln Oil and also the Agrax Earthshade showing through, so you do have quite a mottled kind of blade to it. Now I'm going to use a tiny little bit of Citadel Fuegan Orange and just add some little edges around all of these pockmarks. You don't want to go too wild with this, just around those specific edges, just to add a little bit of that orangey rust colour to it, which will act as a kind of background when we add a little bit of the dry riser rust. So now we're using some of that dry riser rust paint. So you get a little bit on your brush, you wipe off the excess, and then you're just going to gently brush this around the pockmarked areas, just to add that dull kind of rusty orange area around the bits that have corroded quite badly. Next part, we're going to use some Citadel Apothecary White contrast paint. I'm just going to use this on his arms and hands. Now we're going to be using some Citadel Nihilakh Oxide and Apothecary White. We're basically going to be doing the opposite of what we did on the ethereal parts of the Lord Executioner. So we're going to start with the Nihilakh Oxide at the top, and just doing some thin trails and trailing that onto the blade and discolouring the blade slightly where those bits join up. Then we're going to apply some Nihilakh Oxide to a large area of the top part, and then we're going to use the Apothecary White at the bottom and blend those two together like we did with the ethereal parts just above it. Now we're going to be using a little bit of Citadel Nihilakh Oxide. I'm going to start working on the cloth of his robes here, and the areas that you put the Mechanicus standard grey on. You want to start applying some Nihilakh Oxide to these areas just to give it that slightly blue, ghostly tint to it. You don't have to go too heavy with this and don't have to put too much on, just enough that you can see that kind of slightly turquoise colour to the edges of it. And this just brings out the detail, makes them stand out a little bit more, while making them still maintain that kind of ghostliness. Now it's going to be Citadel Ulthuan Grey. We're going to use this on his hands. We're also using this on the ghostly trails coming from his axe below. So if you think about how you did the ghostly trails on both the Lord Executioner and the spirits around him, you're going to be doing the same on those trails below him. On the hands and the arms, you want to be picking out the details, because you can see kind of the tendons in the hands and the knuckles. You can also see the little grooves where the bones would be, or the gaps between the bones rather, on the arms as well. So there's plenty of details to pick out on his hands and his arms, as well as the ghostly trails below. Now we're going to be using some Vallejo White, and exactly the same as we did with the robes and the spirits. We're going to be picking out the details on the ghostly trails here, and using these to highlight the hands and the arms. Now we're going to be going on to the handle of the axe. We're going to be using Citadel Dryad bark and just reapplying some colour to that. Now, there isn't too much detail on this. There is a few little recesses and grooves on there, so you don't want to fill them with the paint. You want to try and go around them where you can. And just trying to paint like we did with the Gallows, you're painting with the grain of the wood. So you're going end to end rather than doing vertical paint strokes on it. Now to highlight this, we're going to mix some Citadel Zandri dust with the Dryad bark, just to give a slightly lighter shade of it. We don't want it too light because we want it to look different to the Gallows. So we're just going to be doing a slight highlight on this one and then another highlight to that. So the final highlight is going to be Citadel Zandri dust mixed with the previous highlight layer colour. And we're just going to do some edge highlights on the wooden handle. This is the last part of the video. So once you've done this, your Lord Executioner should be complete. Also, the last time you used Nighthaunt oxide, you can put a little bit of that on his manacle too, just to give that a little bit of corrosion. So this is the finished Lord Executioner. I've added a gravestone and some flowers to the base there, as well as some sterling battlemire and astrogranite, just to give that a bit more detail. It's a cracking model, really good fun to paint. Looks cool once finished. Thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and if you have, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future content. Also, think about subscribing to some of our other social media linked below. Thanks very much. If you like the channel and you'd like to support us, please feel free to buy us a coffee at our coffee site linked below. Thanks very much.